So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is Megan Gray from URI. I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Megan. I'm from the University of Rhode Island. I'm a master's student there. I'm going to be talking to you today about the effective management for American woodcock on the nesting ecology of eastern towhee and prairie warblers. So the first thing I'm going to do is define the umbrella species concept, which is that management for one species.
Can you use the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better?
It's not on.
Is that better?
No.
Okay, it said it was on. I'm sorry. I'll just speak up.
Oh, there it is.
Is that okay? So I'm going to define the umbrella species concept, which is that management for one species should benefit other non-target species. And some examples of this are the sage grouse and the golden-winged warbler. But most of these studies focus on simple abundance or density of birds or movement ecology, and they don't bring into effect the nesting ecology of two species. So in this example, the golden-winged warbler and the American woodcock are thought to be coexistent in early successional habitat, but when you look at the productivity of both of these species, they don't quite synchronize. So management for American woodcock does not always help golden-winged warbler when you look at productivity or nesting success. So just really briefly, some past URI woodcock work. The woodcock was designated as an umbrella species in Rhode Island. This was done by surveying for songbird species at sites that were managed for American woodcock and sites that were not managed for American woodcock, which were random forest plots. And sites that were managed for American woodcock had greater density and also numbers of birds at those sites. Some other URI woodcock work that's been done is developed a predictive space use map for woodcock. So if you look at this map on the left here, you can see the warmer colors, all the reds, oranges, and yellows. Those are higher use by American woodcock. And all those cooler colors are less likely to be used by American woodcock. And this was developed over years of tracking using VHF telemetry. So my project is unique in the fact that we know all of these sites that are high use for American woodcock and sites that are low use for American woodcock. And just briefly about American woodcock as an umbrella species, they spend time in different aspects of early successional forests. So they have their singing grounds, which are abandoned farmland and roosting fields during the fall migration. They also have feeding cover, which goes into the young stands of shrub and also into some forest that's about 15 to 30 years old. And mature forest is very little used by American woodcock. So we think that in Rhode Island, by managing for American woodcock and maintaining this early successional habitat, we're also going to be supporting a suite of other species that you can see at the bottom there, like field sparrows, towhees, prairie warblers, whippoorwills, and also gray cappers, just to name a few. And this is an example of early successional forest habitat, which I've been talking about quite a bit. And this is where the majority of my master's work took place. So we've got a complex of shrubs on the bottom there and a few older growth trees. So why look at nesting ecology? So in general, as I mentioned before, a lot of umbrella species concepts studies are looking at movement or resource selection data, which helps develop those predictive space use maps. But we don't really look at nesting ecology that often. And it also has important implications for managing populations. So my objectives are to assess male territory size and components of nesting ecology of my two study species, towhees and prairie warblers, to compare high and low quality sites. And I'm going to keep on saying high and low quality sites, but every time I say high and low quality site, that's always what I'm talking about American woodcock. So some of my predictions for my study were that higher quality sites, as seen by American woodcock, should have higher abundance of territorial males with smaller territories, and that high quality sites should also have a higher density of nests. The phenology of hatching should be earlier. They should have higher growth rates of chicks, and there should be a difference in provisioning rates. So eastern towhees, you might be familiar with them. They're one of our largest sparrow species here in the Northeast. I'm going to be focusing on this orange portion here, but during the summer, they're omnivorous. They'll eat bugs and berries, and during the fall and winter, they'll switch over to seeds, and you've probably seen them at your bird feeders. And this is just some Rhode Island specific data from the work that I did these past 2 summers. So in general, eastern towhees arrive end of April, early May, and nesting begins pretty soon after that. And then there's a section of late May to early June where the first nests hatch. And then after that point, we'd start finding the first fledglings of those first nests. And eastern towhees, if their first nest is successful, they will try for a second nest towards the end of June, or at the end of July, excuse me. And that's usually when after that point, we'd also have another crop of fledglings that were obviously from those second nests. But in general, eastern towhees will keep trying to have at least one successful nest between the period of May to July. And departure, it depends, and I'm still waiting to get some data on this. But towards the end of September into the winter, they probably disperse from their sites. And so for prairie warblers, these are a neotropical migrant that we have. They winter down Bahamas and the Caribbean, and they migrate to our early area in late April to early May. But again, I'm focusing on the breeding season here. So as we heard in the presentation before, the Birds of the World report that was published, prairie warblers were listed as a tipping point species, and they're at risk of losing 50% of their population in the next 50 years if nothing changes. So looking at prairie warbler phenology for Rhode Island again, prairie warblers arriving, as I said, around the beginning of May. Then the first nests start happening pretty soon after that. And so what I found in Rhode Island was they really concentrate their first nest into June, that first month. And if they don't have a successful nest during that time frame, it depends how late it fails. They might not try for another nest, and they can start to depart towards late June. But if they do have a successful nest, we'll find their fledglings from the end of June into August sometimes. But after that, these successful birds will start to depart in August to September. Okay, so why are these my study species? They're both characterized by heavy early successional habitat use, and they both declined with the loss of that habitat type. And the Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan actually lists them as a species of greatest conservation need. This is new information for Rhode Island as far as their nesting ecology goes, and they also differ heavily in foraging, migration habits, and also their nests. Okay, so I had 6 study sites. 3 of those were high quality as seen by American woodcock, and 3 of those were low quality. So the 3 high quality sites were Great Swamp, Marion Epley Preserve, Tillinghast Pond, and the 3 low quality sites were Francis Carter Preserve, Arcadia, and Big River Management Area. Oh, and that includes a complex of RIDEM sites, Nature Conservancy sites, and also Audubon properties. So going back to my predictions, I'm going to talk about males first. So I predicted that there should be a higher abundance of territorial males at these sites with smaller territories. And to determine this, the first thing that I did was conducted point counts at all these sites. We did territory mapping of singing males, and we also did targeted misnetting of these breeding males. So point counts are a census technique commonly used to survey numbers of birds. And generally, you either travel to designated points on a route or you follow a transect to count how many singing males you see or hear. Oops. So we did this at a rotating basis at each site. We started at the end of April. We found that the majority of singing males were in greatest abundance between the beginning of May and the beginning of June, which makes sense because after that point, their nests are hatching and they have other things that they have to take care of, which is their nestlings. And then we ended surveys around mid-July. So this is just some preliminary data for abundance of singing males at these sites. So if you think back to my high quality versus low quality sites, this is just separating that out for raw data. So on average, I had over about 8 or 10 singing males at, excuse me, sorry. On average, I had almost 15 singing males at high quality sites and probably about 8 or so at low quality sites. So there seems to be a difference when you break it down and lump the sites together. But when you look at it at a site level, so all the blue is low quality sites and all the green is high quality sites. Some of the sites are acting more on par with a high quality site is what I would say is happening. So Francis Carter there has about pretty steady averages of 10 singing males at the plot that we surveyed, and it's almost appearing to act like a high quality site. So for prairie warblers, I had a little bit of a wider range on these, but about 8 to 7 singing males on average at high quality and low quality sites. But again, when you break it down by site, there's a larger range of data, especially again for Francis Carter, which had over 10, almost 15 singing males whenever we surveyed, on par with Epley Preserve and Tillinghast at the end there. And the Great Swamp, where we surveyed, had no singing males. For prairie warblers, that's likely to do with not having the preferred vegetation structure they like at our survey site. And Arcadia only had 1 bird, so that's why those are not true averages down there. So territory mapping was happening at the same time that we were also doing point counts. And a territory is just a defended area within a bird's home range. And what we would do is we would have playback, and we would find a male that had been singing for more than 6 days. So we weren't territory mapping migrant birds. And we would just move that speaker through the playback through their territory. And we defined a boundary with GPS points taken either when a male stopped following playback or we called in a different male to that same boundary. So again, we identified males that were singing for over 6 days. So we weren't capturing migrants or birds that would leave or disperse. We used an audio lure to capture those birds in mist nets, and we gave them a unique color band and a silver federal band, which you can see in the top right corner there. So for 2 seasons, we did this, and I mapped, me and my field technicians mapped 54 territories for towhees and 40 for prairie warblers in 2022, and we mapped 47 and 35 in 2023. And that's an example of what they look like on the right there on that map. So prairie warblers are in the light blue and towhees in the light pink. That's for 2022 at this site. So that just gives you an idea of how the range of their territory and how they overlap. So if we compare this for a high quality site and low quality site at Tillinghast, which was a high quality site, versus Big River on the right, which was a low quality site, these maps are at the same scale. So you can see that Big River territories in general for both species are much larger. This could due to site specific differences. There's much more vegetation at Tillinghast that these birds can utilize, and there's probably also a difference in resources. So in general, at Big River, those territories are about 4 times the size of the territories at Tillinghast. So going back to my predictions, higher abundance of territorial males with smaller territories, maybe. More analysis, I've got to do it. And moving on to nesting ecology portion. So I predicted that there should be a higher density of more successful nests at high quality sites, and also that the phenology of hatching should be earlier. Ooh, I'm at 14 minutes. All right, so this is an example of towhee and prairie warbler nests. So on the left, we have eastern towhees. They have an open cup nest. They vary in their height and vegetation. They'll nest directly on the ground up to 7 feet up in a tree. Prairie warblers were pretty consistent. They had a little fluffy double lining of down there, and they also were pretty consistent about 1 or 2 feet off the ground in a thickly vegetated shrub. So we searched for nests from May 1st to August 15th. We looked for physical evidence of nesting, which included food carry, a fecal sac removal, which you can see in the bottom right there, or we occasionally walked around and just flushed a female towhee off a nest, or sometimes, very rarely, a prairie warbler. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of the success and predation that we had for towhees and prairie warblers at both high quality sites and low quality sites. So for eastern towhees, I had a 55% success rate. 35% of those nests were predated, and about 10% of those nests were abandoned or infertile. So for low quality sites for eastern towhees, about 40% of those nests were successful, 45% of those nests were predated, and 15% of those nests were abandoned. For high quality sites for prairie warblers, about 50% of those nests were successful, 30% were predated, and 20% were abandoned. For low quality sites, 60% of those nests were successful, 15% were predated, and 25% were abandoned. And the abandoned statistic is higher for prairie warblers because part of their biology is they will build what's called a nest fragment, and they'll build a full nest cup, lay eggs, and then just abandon it. So very briefly going to the hatch state. So for 2022, for high quality sites, it seemed like there is a peak very early in the season for hatching. And then later in the season for low quality sites, there's a peak. But when you compare this to 2023, I had pretty consistent peaks for both high quality and low quality sites. And these two peaks also go back to their first nest and their second nest attempt. For prairie warblers for 2022, they'll try really hard to get that first nest to hatch in the middle of June or so, so that they can get those fledglings out the door and then start migrating. And then for 2023, I had a pretty consistent peak in the middle of June. So the second part of nesting ecology was looking at growth rates of chicks and also looking at provisioning rates at the nests. So for what I did for nestlings was I would find the nest, monitor it for however long that nest survived for. If it hatched, I would weigh those chicks following approved nest monitoring protocol, which is weighing chicks and taking tarsus measurements. And I'm still looking at these data. They do follow a logistic growth curve, so they grow very fast and then it sort of slows down. Because of this, the chicks are altricial, so they require very high parental care. So one of the things that I did was I used trail cameras to quantify visits and feeding trips of adults. And I just finished processing 55,000 camera trapping photos. It took a while. But what I'm looking for is, so since both males and females provision at these nests for both species, I'm looking for differences in frequency of foraging trips and also time away from the nest and seeing if any sorts of those differences align with differences in growth rates. Because what I think is happening is that at low quality sites, there's less resources. So adults are working harder to keep those chicks' growth rates up, but to be determined. And that's just mouths full of food. So some preliminary data from this are shown here. So on the x-axis is the chick's age starting at day 1, and then on the y-axis on my left is the mass of those chicks in grams, and then the other y-axis has provisioning trips of the adults. So you can see at day 1 there, the nest hatches. I come by, I weigh it, and the visits of both the males and the females really skyrocket, particularly the female. But that's also because she's still incubating those young chicks because they are covered with no fluff at all. And you can see previous to the hatch, there are a few incubation trips on there as well that I included. But in general, as those chicks get bigger, the parents are working harder and harder to keep that growth rate up of the chicks. And then at the very end, the trips plummet, and that's because this nest was predated by a snake, but that happens. For prairie warblers, I had to use slightly different methods. So I used much smaller cameras because of how densely vegetated they choose shrubs for their nests. So those cameras had limited battery life. Those are about 2 hours long. So this is just a slightly truncated version of that same graphic. So same message, as those chicks get bigger, those trips skyrocket. And so these are some of the predators that I found while camera trapping. It does happen. It's kind of sad, but it just happens. So I had a lot of snake predation at a few of my sites, particularly Francis Carter and Tillinghast. But I also had broad-winged hawks at some of my more mature for forest sites that still had early successional habitat types, but were more connected to more mature forest types. And so going forward, I'm finishing up my analysis. I'm going to be writing my thesis, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to make some conclusions on some of my predictions that I told you guys about. As far as some things seem like they're aligned with my predictions, but some things I'm still collecting more data for. All right, and this is just questions, and this is collaboratively funded between RIDEM and Fish and Wildlife. And we get funding from the Fish and Wildlife Services Sports Fish Restoration Program. And if you guys are ever out birding and you see a bird with color bands, I would love an email and if you get a photo of it.